Hi, my name is Ben Still and I teach saxophone here at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte, and today I'll be performing A Major from Himie Voxman's Selected Studies for Saxophone. Hi, my name is Ben Still and I teach saxophone here at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. And today I'll be providing some tips and tricks on A Major from Himie Voxman's Selected Studies for Saxophone. This etude is marked andante, which means a moderately slow tempo. And my first general piece of advice for this piece would be to not take it too fast. And that's for two reasons. One, despite it being slow, there is still a lot of technique embedded throughout, particularly in our ornamentation, such as our trills and grace notes. And the second reason is the slow tempo provides us an opportunity to be really musical, not only with our tone and our phrasing, but also our dynamic range, as well as it gives us an opportunity to potentially use some vibrato. Another general tip that I would recommend is to play through this etude first without any of the ornamentation. So that's our trills, our grace notes, and our turns. This will give us a chance to hear the melody as well as understand the core rhythm. And after you've played through it a few times and you understand those elements, that's when I would add in the ornamentation. Be sure to be really smooth at the beginning of this etude. It starts off piano and it doesn't really grow very loud. So make sure that we're using really good air support and we're using smooth finger technique. We don't want any harsh sounds at the beginning of this etude. And that includes the accents in measures 2 and 3. Those accents need to be more air-oriented rather than having a lot of tongue in them. In measure 3, we have our first turn, and for that one, I would recommend a alternate fingering for the D natural that's in there. Instead of using our long D natural, which requires all 6 of these fingers plus the octave key, I would recommend using our side D, sometimes we call it alternate D. This key is sometimes referred to as C2. It's one of our palm keys, and if you play that without the octave key, it actually sounds as a D as well. This will help with fluidity and so that we're not crossing the break and making a really clunky sound. In measure 6, we also encounter a trill, which I also think requires an alternate fingering. On this E sharp here, we trill from E sharp to F sharp because of the key signature. And here I would use our alternate F sharp fingering, where we play it with our ring finger. Sometimes we call it side F sharp or even fork F sharp. But this is a great trill fingering for F to F sharp, or in this case, E sharp to F sharp, that I would use. This allows us to avoid flipping, which causes a lot of noise and isn't very efficient. Beware of the trill in measure 32. Remember that the F sharp is going to trill to a G sharp because of the key signature. And the grace notes there have an E sharp and then an F sharp. And that F sharp, I would again use this side F sharp or the alternate F sharp. This will allow for a smoother set of grace notes. Dynamics are really important throughout this entire etude. So remember to not start too loud too soon. This etude begins on a piano dynamic. And if we start too loud, then we have no room to grow when we reach our mezzo fortes and our forte dynamics. As the rhythm gets faster, particularly in measure 11, when we start to see 16th notes, be sure to maintain really smooth finger technique, as well as continue using really good air support and thinking fast air as we're moving through those 16th notes. Measure 15 represents a quasi-cadenza, and we can tell this by a few ways. One, if you look at the measure, there's actually more than 4 beats in that measure, as well as there's some smaller printed notes that kind of look like grace notes. Just like any technical passage, even in this quasi-cadenza section, make sure that you take them really slowly at first and gradually bump up the tempo in terms of how fast you're going to take them. These 64th notes are meant to be played somewhat out of time, which allows us the opportunity to experiment with some tempo changes and allow us to be really musical with it. Be sure that we hear every single note in that run. After the cadenza, measure 16 picks up the original tempo, so be sure to go the same tempo that you started at the beginning of the etude. In measure 18, we have a mezzo forte, so be sure to enter in strong. This will contrast the measure that comes before measure 18 in terms of dynamics, as well as sets up the piano that comes later in the etude. The trills in measure 22 are meant to be quick because they're on eighth notes. However, the trills in measure 24, we can actually vary the speed just a little bit because where they're on half notes. And so we have some time to play them a little bit slower and then speed them up throughout. This is another opportunity to show off musicality. Vibrato can be used throughout this entire etude. So as you practice, experiment with different speeds as well as widths. And at the very end, you can experiment with a slight ritardando. Again, this is your chance to show off some musicality. Overall, this is a wonderful etude that allows you to show off your technical ability, but also to be really expressive and musical. Of course, be sure to be playing with really good tone and good smooth phrasing, but also make sure that you have great dynamic contrast, as well as experiment with some vibrato throughout. My name is Ben Still, and I teach saxophone here at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. Happy practicing!